got it on. Look. Are you gonna lie?
Let me look.
What's it?
Yeah, that's good. That's perfect.
How you spell Wesley?
WESLEY.
He's on.
We're going to get started with our third panel. I would ask that the panelists make their way to the stage as I will give them an introduction. I'm so excited for this panel, y'all.
I'm recording. I'm recording.
It's so interesting, you know. You can have a whole Malcolm event, panel, symposium, whatever you want to call it, and never really touch on the question of Islam. And it's always been stunning to me. And at the beginning, for those of you who weren't here, I said that one of the reasons why we do the Malcolm X Symposium every year is so that we never have to leave our children with a memory or a construction of Malcolm that is so radically different from who and what we understand Malcolm to be, what the text suggests Malcolm is, what history suggests Malcolm is. And I think one of the ways that we lose track of who Malcolm is and who Malcolm was is when we lose track of the particular way, the particular role of Islam in his life. And so I was like, who can I get that can come up here and help us think about Malcolm and Islam in ways that are critical, in ways that might make us uncomfortable, in ways that will always enlighten us, and in ways that are really fresh and innovative. And so I put my dream list together, and they all said yes. And I don't take that lightly. I'm very grateful to have all of them here. To my left is my dear friend and brother, Wesley Muhammad. Dr. Wesley is a graduate of, he has a PhD from the University of Michigan. The sports fan in me holds that against him.
You're not Ohio, right?
No, I was Penn State. So, you know.
Where's she at?
It's true. Yeah, she Ohio. She gonna come back in too, just that. She gonna come in and boo you. Just on sports. But the scholar in me appreciates the level of care and attention that my dear brother Wesley has put into his work. I first encountered him many years ago. I think we did a panel together here in Philadelphia, International House. But since then, I came to take his work very seriously. I remember reading your dissertation and sitting with it and wrestling with it and reading the footnotes and struggling with it. Then I read the book that became the dissertation, and I went back to the dissertation to understand your process, and I learned so much. And your commitment to deep scholarship has been a reward to all of us. It's been a gift to all of us. But more importantly, you have been a friend and a brother, and someone who's willing to push me and challenge me and check me and all the things we got to do for each other as brothers do. And for that, I'm grateful. Thank you. And let's please give a warm round of applause to Wesley Muhammad. Brother Malik Mubashir is, I encountered him as a customer at Uncle Bobby's first. I was making lattes. Frequent customer, man. There was an award, you would have got it. But every day I would see him with all these books, and he'd be reading everything. And he had your book, he had Malcolm, then he'd have Zoroaster. It didn't matter. I was impressed by how widely he read. It wasn't until later that I found out that he actually was a scholar of Islam, and that he was an imam, and that he was someone who was deeply committed to understanding Islam in all these different ways. We start telling our stories about the communities we grew up in and came through, and I learned so much about this brother. And I said, if we have a conversation on this, I need him there. And so this brother, where are you at now? Are you Friend Central?
No, Friend Select.
Friend Select, excuse me, it's downtown, that's why I think Central. He is a scholar, he is a teacher, he is directly working with youth and adults. A brilliant brother. Please give it up for Dr. Malik Mubashir. He gave a degree too. And I love these two brothers to my left, but I gotta tell you, it's been a dream of mine to meet you, much less have you in a room sharing your ideas. I remember reading African American Islam and being completely moved by it. I mean, there was Sierra Lincoln, and there's a few texts we had out there that we could appeal to. But Christianity, I was reading Rabbit Toe, and I was trying to make sense of this. And then there was you.
That's right.
And you again opened up a whole new world of possibility and let us understand that Islam could be studied at the scholarly level on the one hand, but on the other hand, that you could be a believer and still be critically engaged with Islam as a site of study and a unit of analysis. And a lot of folk didn't think that could be done. This woman is, without exaggeration, a legend. She is an intellectual hero, and she is the foundation upon which so much of religious studies, black religious studies, and all other religious studies stands. Please give Amina Ad-Din a warm round of applause. Matter of fact, stand to your feet for this. Thank you. Now it's time to get the proceedings proceeding. one of the most enduring narratives of Malcolm, particularly post-movie, is the narrative of Malcolm is born, he's bad, he goes to jail, he gets converted, but he gets converted to bad Islam, he goes to Mecca, he sees white people, he learns good Islam, he dies. And that Disney-fied narrative of Malcolm becomes the template for how we understand, in some ways, not just Malcolm, but Islam. What I want to do today is complicate and trouble that. Now, oh, my brother Rodney, I apologize. You move without observation, brother. I turned around and I'm impressed. My dear brother Rodney Muhammad is not only the minister of Mosque number 12, he's also the president of the NAACP here. He is a leader, he is an activist, he is an organizer, he is a voice, and he's our dear brother. Please give him a round of applause. How can we trouble or complicate that narrative of Malcolm that I offered just now, that seems to be in many ways a dominant story of Malcolm? Feel free. You
Start with the truth.
let's go.
Please, Brother Wesley, go ahead.
Can you hear me? First, I'm honored to participate in this discussion. I'm very impressed. Boy, y'all know a lot about Malcolm X. They are great experts on Malcolm X that I heard. I'm honored to share this panel with these august and brilliant black minds. I want to thank you, Brother Dr. Mark, for your brilliant scholarship, your activism for this Malcolm X Symposium. I have a special thank you because you invited the Nation of Islam to participate in this discussion of Malcolm X. And rarely ever do community discussions about Malcolm X ever involve the Nation of Islam. You have an academic discourse they are calling Elijah Muhammad Studies. They have conferences on Elijah Muhammad Studies, and no Nation of Islam members are invited, though the Nation of Islam has scholars. Malcolm X was in the Nation of Islam from 13 to 17 years, depending on when you start his belonging to the Nation of Islam, either from 13 to 17 years. He announced his separation from the Nation of Islam in March of 1964. In February of 1965, he was dead. That means for less than a year, approximately 350 days, Malcolm X was outside of the Nation of Islam. And every scholar of Malcolm X intellectuality knows that in those 350 days outside of the Nation of Islam, his intellectual thought process changed. It grew, it morphed, it shifted. So the communists claim El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, the black bourgeois claim El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, because in the 350 days outside of the Nation of Islam, he was in flux, but for 15 or 13 to 17 years, he was Islam. So to exclude the Nation of Islam from the discussion of Malcolm X produces things such as this that we witness here today. Malcolm X and manhood. Ozzie Davis said our black shining prince, but wasn't mentioning it needs to be understood. Detroit Red or Malcolm Little did not exemplify black shining manhood. Malcolm X did, but Malcolm X was part in the Nation of Islam that Malcolm X was committed to for 13 to 17 years. He engaged in what we have, a manhood training class. Malcolm X's manhood was not unique to himself. Malcolm X's manhood that so impressed the world, we said an archetype of black masculinity. We want to queer Malcolm today. So we discussed the possibility of a queering Malcolm X project. But you cannot queer Malcolm X. You can queer Malcolm Little. You can queer Detroit Red. If you want to accept the stories from Shorty Jarvis and Bruce Perry and Manny Marble that Malcolm Little engaged in fellatio with other boys, but Malcolm X did not. So we, in order to attach to the Malcolm that we want, we have to go all the way before his 13 to 17 years with the Nation of Islam to queer him. Because we can't queer Malcolm X, or we pigeonhole him to the 350 days where his thought was in flux. Everything to avoid acknowledging a critical fact. Not simply that Malcolm X that we love is the Malcolm X produced in the womb of the Nation of Islam. And I say in closing, Dr. Craig Carr did an excellent discussion of the intellectual networks that Malcolm Little had available to him before encountering the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He was a well-read man before meeting the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but it was not those intellectual networks that produced the man that the world loves, because a lot of people got knowledge. A lot of people read the books that Malcolm read. What made Malcolm X and no longer Malcolm Little or Detroit Red was not the knowledge he acquired from the prison library, but in the Nation of Islam, he got a manhood training that married knowledge to morality and spirituality in a particular way. And the same boom that produced the Malcolm X that we love produced the Muhammad Ali from Cassius Clay that we love. What I'm saying is, every single discussion on Malcolm X, no matter how erudite it is woefully inadequate, and even disingenuous when that discussion takes place absent the contribution of the Nation of Islam.
Assalamu alaikum. that that's one of the things that I'm writing on now. In Islamic studies, of course, Malcolm isn't there. And many in the immigrant community include him after they acknowledge that he made Hajj. Not the first time he made it, but after they acknowledge that he made Hajj. So one of my projects is to look at what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad actually taught in the nation. And as an outsider, I think I'm enabled because I read the facts and the lessons a little differently, and then I go into Mosque Mariam in Chicago and interview everybody I can find. But I think that it is important to put quotes around the fact that Malcolm X is born in the nation. And a lot of things have been written, and they tend to focus on the spurious, the salacious, the blood and gore of whatever they can find. But actually, what is going on there is, on one end, is taking a people who don't have knowledge, and the Quran asks you to seek knowledge. The Quran tells you to read. So what I see is a pattern that builds manhood or womanhood, because it's doing both, and that if you pay attention, it doesn't matter if you have a degree or not. I have many friends who have PhDs and MDs who are members of the nation, who the letter to get into the nation floored them. It's like, oh my God, I can't write this, what is my problem? And the problem is that you think you know. And when you think you know, you can't learn anything. And I think that that was a very, very important setting. In all of these texts that have been written, there is a pattern, however. There is a digging in. This past February, one of the things that happened in the Midwest, I don't know if it also, I doubt if it happened in Philadelphia, was the fact that, I think it was Wisconsin, in the Senate, the black senators wanted to lay out who they wanted to talk about, and put up during Black History Month. They submitted their name, the names that they had. Malcolm X was one of them. The white senators said no, because it was they that decided who, during Black History Month, was going to receive any acclaim. And I suspect that happens everywhere. It's the same thing that happens with Martin Luther King. You can talk about Martin Luther King as long as he's loving everybody. But when he decides to take people to task, he becomes somebody else, and's got to go. We can continue the conversation.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Yeah, I'm thinking about the Muslim poet, Jalaluddin Rumi, when I think of Malcolm. Jalaluddin Rumi has a parable about an elephant that 6 blind men go to experience. And depending on how they grasp that elephant, they all come away with a different perspective about what the elephant is. So those that grasp the sides said, oh, the elephant's like a wall, it's very clear. Some grabbed the tusk and said, no, you're wrong, the elephant's like a spear. And before long, depending on which part of the elephant they grabbed, they knew or thought they knew all about the elephant, and even came to blows with each other because they thought they were all right. And they were all partially right, but they were all also wrong. Malcolm X reminds me of that elephant, because depending on what you're looking for in that man, depending on what you grab, if you're a Trotskyite, like Brightman, you come away and say, oh, Malcolm was getting ready to become a revolutionary socialist, join the Socialist Workers' Party. If you Pan-Africanist with a cultural emphasis, then Malcolm's getting ready to join the Pan-African Black Arts Movement. But no matter what side of the elephant you look at, the one that is routinely ignored or used ingenuously, as Dr. Wesley Muhammad said, is the Islamic Malcolm. Without Islam, there is no Malcolm X or El Hajj Malik el-Shabazz. And without the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his work, and the womb that provided for Malcolm's intellectual growth and development, there is no Malcolm X and no El Hajj Malik el-Shabazz. One of the things that has always fascinated me when I studied Malcolm, and I've been blessed to talk to any number of people who are close to Malcolm, his brother Wilfred, Filbert, his sister Ella, some of the members of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's family who knew and worked with him, and also people like Minister Jeremiah Shabazz, and people who worked with Malcolm on a regular basis. One of the things that has always intrigued me is continuity and change in Malcolm's life as he grows and develops. What is it that he took from the Nation of Islam with him, no matter what he developed into later on? And he was interviewed in the Egyptian Gazette when he was traveling in the Middle East toward the last of that 350 days of his life. And he was asked, well, what is it that attracted you to Islam? And he said three things. He said unity, morality, and militancy. And Malcolm wasn't just attracted to any variety of Islam. He tells you the things that drew him in. He tells you the things that he thought benefited black people. Because you know in the Nation of Islam, if anybody's ever been, one of the things they will ask you if you're a visitor at the end is how many people believe what you've heard is true? How many people believe what you've heard is good for black people? So Malcolm was looking for a religion. He wasn't actually looking for a religion. He was looking for a vehicle of liberation for black people. Because if you read Malcolm Jarvis's book, if you read the other book that we've talked about earlier, Malcolm had visitors when he was in prison from different Islamic communities. There was a man named Abdul Hamid from the Ahmadiyya community who wrote to Malcolm Jarvis and wrote to Malcolm Little, as he was then known, and came and taught him how to make the ritual prayers. But it wasn't the Ahmadiyya movement that Malcolm joined. There was something else he was looking for. And his brother Wilfred told me, having come out of the Garveyite experience, he said, we weren't looking for a religion. He said, our mother, Louise Little, told us if we wanted religion, all we had to do was pick up the Bible and read the red letter words of Jesus. All the other stuff was man-made. All threw in there. And that was childhood conditioning. And then they joined
Thurman in there too, yeah.
And then they joined the Garvey movement, and so Wilfred said, we would have joined the devil himself if it would have helped us fight for black people. So Malcolm was looking for a vehicle of liberation for black people, and he found it in the work and the teaching and the missions of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And one other thing before I pass it on. There's another myth that gets done about Malcolm and Islam, which you touched on, Brother Mark, at the beginning, which is white, Turks, Muslims, and white. And so it's not like Malcolm didn't know that Islam, and he did not go to Mecca and then say, oh, this is the real Islam. He didn't even want to leave the Nation of Islam, which I'm sure Brother Minister will probably touch on. He had to leave, and then he had to regroup and come up with a new basis, a new organizational basis for himself. And he...
Well, listen. See, y'all can't be whispering the good stuff. I want y'all to hear this too. So, I don't think he left the nation. We ain't gonna bury the lead.
Malcolm,
I want them to hear it. I want to have a conversation.
It is also a fact that Malcolm was trying very hard to get back to the Nation of Islam, sent a series of recorded letters to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad asking him to come back. And they've been documented, and you can find and listen to them. And Malcolm was killed before that could...
Oh, so we got somewhere to go. I want my brother Ryan to jump in, and I want to circle back to some of this stuff. Because this is why we had a symposium, so we don't have these same conversations.
Right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you again, Mark. I echo thanks to you for having us here and having this discussion and having the nation involved in the discussion, because I'm understanding that different symposiums go on about Islam, and that where the Nation of Islam is not even asked to be a part of it, and it's a big part of Islam in America. And I start with the difference with Islam here as opposed to Islam had a mission here. It wasn't just practicing rituals and that kind of thing. We had a mission here It was a spiritual teacher that drew Malcolm, and it was spiritual knowledge that drew him. Much of what formed Malcolm X were the disciplines, as has been said before me, from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But all of this was a spiritual content. I don't think people know Malcolm a lot about, his spiritual development. But he's a very, as Minister Farrakhan taught us, he was fiercely disciplined. And most people that claim Malcolm to be their man are nowhere near disciplined the way Malcolm X was. They would have a hard time with a person like Malcolm X if he were alive here to put demands on us. But I want to talk about our real enemy, the one responsible for COINTELPRO, and that, because see, this is someone who took a picture of Malcolm Little in a mugshot, and he went from a mugshot to having his picture on a U.S. postal stamp. And it was Malcolm that said, once the enemy gets a hold of me, I'll be no good to you. We definitely have to make certain that whether the face is white or black, that it's not our open enemy that's producing the narrative, the image, and the outlook on Malcolm X. What the Honorable Elijah Muhammad did with Malcolm Little was far greater than what America had done with him. And I want to say this too, that in the hate that hate produced with Mike Wallace, producing this group of Muslims that white America was having a problem with, they pointed to the Islam in the East saying, see, this is the model Muslim that you want to be. But after 9/11, every time they put a picture up now, you don't see somebody with a suit and a bow tie. You see them pointing to the same one that was supposed to be the model Islam that they wanted to encourage black people in America to embrace, which was to make Malcolm, as they're trying to do, make him more user-friendly for white America now. That's how he got on the postage stamp. And so we really want to be careful of that. And then, with the first plot was to make everyone think the nation killed Malcolm. I heard it as late as Friday on the radio, on WURD, that it was a wiretap, that it was instructions from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to have Malcolm killed. And there is, even the enemy don't have any kind of documentation of that. So this is the kind of narrative that goes around, and people add to it. And as I close, I just refer to, one of my early captains when I came in the Nation of Islam was Khalid Abdul Muhammad. Khalid always took the position and always trained us. If we killed Malcolm, we're not afraid to tell you we did it. But we would never have done that, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would never have had it done. But we've had so many black leaders killed that black America hasn't done anything about it. That nobody needs to hide from black people when they kill their leaders, vis-a-vis our open enemies.
Right.
So,
Just a clarifying point, and I don't want to belabor this, but when you say the men in the Audubon Ballroom who shot Malcolm, Talmadge, Hare, and so forth,
right.
were
There's still controversy around that, but because there were people involved. The main point here was that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, a man who had faced enemies as early as 1935, actually ran for 7 years, running from people inside the house that wanted to kill him. Some of these people, we understand now, joined the Nation of Islam years later, and he would never point them out because he knew what would happen to them. They weren't going to be safe for those that joined the Honorable Elijah Muhammad later and had learned of that early history. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad never, in fact, he did give an instruction to leave Malcolm X alone.
and there's no evidence that to the contrary, despite what some of the rumors and conspiracy theories say. And I'm just clarifying that for the audience's purpose.
And I want to close on one other point.
Please, I don't mean to
In
interrupt you.
Western world civilization, religious practice is always taking the servant and exalting the servant over the God. So you can if you look at how religion is being practiced in these last days, you can call the name of God and you get very little reaction. But you call the name of his servant, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, or Prophet Muhammad, or these kinds of things, and you get greater reaction. So we're in a model where we take the student of somebody that's actually been produced by someone else, and take that person and illuminate them over the very teacher that produced them. So Black History Month passed with little or no mention of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad at all, who had a greater impact than many people that were lifted up during Black History.
Almost all of them. Almost all of them. Let me jump in, only because of time's sake. I want to cover a few more areas. I want you to jump in. So I want to ask a question. Something came about Malcolm's membership in the nation. I want to circle back to that. And if you want to do that now, we can, because I want to also talk about Malcolm's theology. I think those things may go together.
I just want to, could I build on the
Yeah,
point
please.
just made? You know, when your open enemy tells you what the true religion is, you got a problem. And I always thought it was interesting that whenever the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's Islam was taught, here comes the news media of the enemy saying, well, that's not the real Islam. We're going to tell you what the real Islam is. Well, if it's the real Islam, why don't you follow it then? You know, but they never did. They just wanted to dismantle this. And I was thinking about, it just serves their foreign policy. If you think back to the 1979, 1980 in the Iran conflict with the rise of Ayatollah Khomeini, beautiful brother, and the first modern revolution waged in the name of Islam. If you remember, if everybody's old enough to remember, the news media would always say, well, the Shiite Muslims are the bad ones. They're the terrorists.
Yeah.
You know, and you couldn't watch the news without hearing Shiite Muslim terrorists linked together. And the Sunnis, they said, those were the good ones. So here they are telling you who the good ones and who the bad ones are. What's the common denominator? Who's working with them? Who's resisting and fighting their oppression? Fast forward a couple of decades, now you got Al-Qaeda, you got the Taliban, now all of a sudden, they're the bad guys. Under Ronald Reagan's administration, the Taliban got an award as American freedom fighters. They compared them with the founding fathers until the fall of the Soviet Union, when the Taliban looked around and said, we got some other enemies we need to deal with now. And now all of a sudden, they're the bad Muslims. So you really have to, my only point is you have to really watch out when you're struggling for liberation and you let other people's media tell you what is the right religion. Because as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad used to always say, what makes you think the man that didn't treat you right will teach you right? Which segues into the theology problem.
Well, I think I want to tag in on the end of that. You know, Islam in world history has always settled inside of the cultures to which it has come. And that Islam in America among African Americans could look any different than the nation would be an anomaly. Right. Okay, it had to have a particular set of things because there is a particular history here. There's always been, and I always get upset about this thing of immigrant Islam is the real Islam. If it is, given the situation of the Middle East, it's in bad shape. And that's not, you know, I mean, you don't want to make a comparison there. When cultures, however, take over what is Islam, what is that core, then the culture wins out and we have what we're looking at now over there. I think that the nation in the United States has gotten a bad rap because it's been designed that way. It was designed to uplift, what is that phrase? Wait a minute, woke. To make, I'm getting there, sorry. To wake people up, and you couldn't have that. You know, many of the other black traditional movements, Father Divine and Daddy Grace and all of those things, had a beginning and you didn't hear about the end, but you knew they weren't there anymore. The Nation of Islam is still there. So that speaks to not only its longevity, but its longevity inside of people.
So,
Wesley, let me ask you a question, Brother Wes. I'm sorry. I thought you. Okay. Okay. Cool. I don't want those problems. Right. So, Brother Wes, so there's a question of Malcolm's membership in an organization versus another, and then there's the question of Malcolm's theological development from, say, what year did he join the nation? Was it 50? About that? 50, right? It was 50. Yeah. I think he signed in 50. He was reading in 49, right? Yeah. So there's a moment, and again, the movie jacks this up, but there's this moment in the autobiography where he talks about this moment of theophany, where he's in the prison and he sees Master Farad Muhammad. And he believes, and we have no reason to believe otherwise, that he believes that Allah, as the nation teaches, that Allah appears in the person of Master Farad Muhammad in 1930, and he believes in that Elijah Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. There comes a moment after, and again, I sidetracking note, Malcolm's trip to Mecca that I said was Disneyfied earlier, isn't his first, he has other engagements, as you say, he had met white Muslims before, he'd been to the Middle East before, in 59, he stepped foot in Gaza, he stepped foot in Egypt, he Saudi Arabia, so this wasn't new to him, so if he got converted by seeing white folk, he had a delayed reaction, right? 5 years. But there is an interesting thing where at the end he does reject that theology to some extent, and he does reject some of the ontological claims about white folk as the devil. He doesn't reject white supremacy as a real thing, but it seems like he's no longer saying that white people by nature are the devil. So there's a theological shift in Malcolm, at least that he expresses. How do we make sense of Malcolm wanting to return to the nation on the one hand, but also Malcolm being very clear that his understanding of Islam, his teachings about everything from the Kaaba to theodicy, to theology, to soteriology, all that stuff has shifted. How do we make sense of that Malcolm shift?
Very good question. There's only one way we can make sense of the alleged shift. We have to come to terms with the fact that Malcolm X himself participated and, in fact, originated the myth making. In the beginning, you described the mythic narrative, the Disneyfied narrative. But Malcolm X originated that mythic narrative. Let me back up. Malcolm's relationship to the Nation of Islam, understanding the facts of that is critical to understanding your question. Malcolm X did not leave the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X never left the womb that bore him. And so the shift, and we're going to cite the facts on that, the shift, we can show that the shift of which you speak was artificial. December 1963, Malcolm X makes the chickens come home to roost statement. He gets disciplined. He's put on what's called in the Nation of Islam C class, which means as a minister, he's not put outside the community, but he could no longer preach from the rostrum. He could no longer speak in the public. Yet, everyone has seen the famous footage of Malcolm X in Miami with Cassius Clay announcing he's now Muhammad Ali, and the reporters are asking, did you make him a Muslim? And Malcolm is answering the question. Malcolm was in violation of his C class. Malcolm was subsequently moved from C class, which means probation, to F class. F class means you are put out of the community for a period of time. When Malcolm X announced in March of 1964, and you should study his announcement, he himself said that I'm not leaving the Nation of Islam, but I was put out. He was put on F time, and Malcolm never wanted to be out of the Nation of Islam, as was mentioned. He sent continuously communications, or attempted to send communications to the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who never shifted in his theology. Malcolm X went to Saudi Arabia in 1959 as an ambassador of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who was preparing to make Umrah. He saw white Muslims in Riyadh. He saw white Muslims throughout the Middle East. He had no epiphany in 1964. He didn't see anything in 1964 that he did not see and understand in 1959. So when he claimed a Pauline experience that was for political expediency because he got kicked out of the nation of Islam, or put on F time. He didn't want to serve that time, so he announced he's going to go it on his own. He reached out to the Negro leadership, civil rights leaders. They rejected him because of the monkey that was on his back. So he feigned a Pauline experience. And I close with, according to Charles Kenyatta, his bodyguard and close friend, he said that on that day, that fateful day, February 21st, 1965, at the Audubon Ballroom, on that day, if the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad walked in that room and said, "Come, son," Malcolm would have dismounted that stage and went with his teacher, returned home to the place he never wanted to leave, the Nation of Islam. So the shift, the transformation, the Pauline experience is not factual. It was for political expediency, so that's why I say Malcolm was the originator of the myth that we are deconstructing today.
Good day.
Okay. Y'all got it.
Well, I want to try and maybe add some psychological layers of complexity to this as Malcolm develops as a human being. I don't disagree, first of all, that Malcolm was very capable of crafting a narrative, excellent salesman. In fact, he's so conscious of this that in the autobiography, he says that he noticed that the Arab world was not skillful at marketing Islam. And that if you could just come home to America, and if they knew how to market it to American mentality, they would have many more converts. So Malcolm is a very astute crafter of his own mythology. But that said, I don't think it's as simple as that, because Malcolm was also, like a lot of people in the Nation of Islam, Malcolm was grappling with certain things in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's theology for some time. We know from at least the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's son, Akbar Muhammad, who was a student at Al-Azhar University and who had become a Sunni Muslim before Malcolm did, said that Malcolm was very good, and Imam Warthi Muhammad says something similar, that Malcolm was very good at bringing an initiative or an interpretation of Islam to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, saying, "Dear Holy Apostle, can I have your permission to present your teachings in this way?" So that, for instance, Dr. Greg Carr mentioned earlier that when Malcolm would read lots of things, he was a reader and a teacher. So he would take information and he would put it in a language that people could understand. And we know, for instance, that even though he taught Yaqub's history and the making of the white man from the big-headed scientist Yaqub 6,600 years ago, Malcolm didn't teach that in the streets of Harlem. Malcolm said to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, "Can you let me preach your message using the language of Moses, bringing the captive Hebrews out of the land of bondage, out from under Pharaoh? Because I can tell that to my people and they'll understand that. Eisenhower will be Pharaoh, or John the Fox Kennedy will be Pharaoh. Black people will be the Hebrew children, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you will be the modern Moses bringing them out." So I'm saying all that to say that Malcolm was grappling with the best way to present elements of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's theology. And by the 60s, he was already having tutorials with Dr. Mahmoud Yusuf Shawarbi of the Islamic Center of Riverside, New York. He was taking private tutorials in traditional Islam. He had written and corresponded with numbers of people from the Arab and African world who asked him, "Well, what are you saying? That's not how we understand Islam." So I think he was thinking about these things. And one of the problems I think Malcolm had, and I'll close on this, is when he made his shift, his profession of Sunni Islam, I don't think he ever found the the mechanism within Sunni Islam to focus on black liberation till the day he died. I don't think he found in that, and I understand it because I went through the same thing. Because when I came into Islam, I was so attracted by the Nation of Islam and by its liberating theology, which directly addresses our condition as a people here in this country. But then I started saying, well, people said, well, but you should expose yourself to the more Quran and the traditional Islamic world. And I ended up doing that. And I took my Shahada, and at the end of the day, still very unsatisfied. Years later, because I said, well, look, this is all very good, and Islam is a universal message. I can buy that. It has universal principles. But where are the ingredients in that to liberate and uplift and free my people? Because if I can't find that, what good is it? And Malcolm said something very similar to that. He said, if your religion can't do more for you than it has, you need to get rid of it anyway. So I don't think Malcolm ever resolved that issue till the day he died. And I think that he missed the brotherhood, and he missed the strong organizational base to work from that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave him. So I don't doubt that if the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, come on home, son, he'd have been right there. But I don't necessarily agree that he was totally insincere in his conversion process and thinking and growing about how he was going to be a Muslim. Thank you.
I think that it's also important for us, perhaps, to examine the autobiography, because we got to see what autobiography does. And in this case, you have the person telling you a life story, and you have someone interpreting it. So when you have in the introduction, Alex Haley saying that it's going to be a story about redemption, then that's flavoring all the questions he's going to answer Malcolm. And Malcolm is a showman. He's going to tell the best story he can tell to present himself in a particular kind of way that has redemption at the end of the story. And redemption is not in somebody else's cultural appropriation of Islam. You have to have your own appropriation of Islam. And I think Malcolm knew that, but he wanted to present a story. And it's not that the autobiography has not captured the imagination of people as it was intended to do, and had people explore the nation, Islam in general. But I think many African Americans are looking at what is Sunni Islam, and Sunni Islam is an historical construction. And they're deciding, well, maybe I don't want to be that. I'll just be Muslim, and y'all take that, and I'll see you with it and all your civil war at a later date.
Thank you, sister, for saying that too, because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, I never heard him say he was Sunni or Shiite.
Thank you.
In everything I read on him so far. But I wanted to say too that Dr. Wesley has a point, that something was crafted, and Malcolm was trying to establish in that 9 months that is considered outside of the nation, a base for himself. That's why he started reaching out to civil rights leaders that he had been severely critical of, even to the point that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had to caution him not to make personal attacks on certain civil rights leaders. He said, brother, that will backfire on you, and it'll come back on you in the public. And so he says it's all right to challenge ideas in the marketplace of ideas where they're debated and that kind of thing, but not to make personal attacks. But I wanted to say too that Malcolm was well aware. If you go back to some early lectures, the Black Man's History, it was not mythical. He didn't have to show the Honorable Elijah Muhammad Moses' history, because the Moses that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught about 4,000 years ago, actually, if you go back to those early teachings, he was the one lifting up the serpent in the wilderness. This was the caves and hillsides of Europe. The post-millennialist scholars in the Bible say that 2/3 of the Bible had yet to be fulfilled. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad always taught that 75% of what you read in the scripture was dealing with more of the end time rather than a historical period. So there was no record. He always taught there was no real record. And Egyptian history is the oldest recorded history on the planet. There was no record of the Jews or Hebrews being in bondage bondage 400 years inside of Egypt, and someone coming to bring them out in this great exodus. But he said that he already had taught in earlier articles this was a history that we're living right now. We're the people who have been in bondage for 400 years or better that Abraham was made to see by God Almighty. And so that theology, Malcolm was spoon-fed that theology from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He didn't have to give it to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He may have preached it that way, and it was the way from everything that I see from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's earlier teachings before Malcolm became his megaphone and his chief voice in the land, that he always presented that history to us, and we were made to see ourselves in that light. Because he said that's a prophetic picture serving us today to see what we're walking in.
Thank you for that. I want to take questions. I had a question for y'all, but I think y'all are just going to say no, based on the way this conversation has gone. I'm going to ask it, though. She's time to say no. Some have argued, and I had this conversation actually on a conference call about a few days ago with regard to this conference, that the way Malcolm's intellectual trajectory was going and his political trajectory was going, that had Malcolm proceeded to live another 10 or 20 years, he would not have been Muslim. This has been a conversation that people have, given where he was going. I suspect y'all all gonna say no, that that's not true. But there's an interesting term when you think about where Malcolm was, and even the sort of ambivalence Malcolm had about his own political formation at some point. Where he said, "Look, I'm no longer wedded to a socialist posture or communist posture. I'm down for whatever's gonna help." I'm paraphrasing. I'm down for whatever's gonna help black folk. And that he was, at the very least, grappling with some of these theological questions, grappling with organizational connections, perhaps wanting to go back to the nation if that's the case, but not back at the nation. Developing an internationalist position, but still very much thinking about civil rights issues in the States. Malcolm was in flux in a lot of ways.
Why is that in flux? I mean, the fact that you think about black and brown people here doesn't mean that you can't simultaneously think about black and brown people in the world. I mean, it's not a flux, it's broad-based thinking, perhaps.
Yeah. I meant more in terms of how he thought about solutions to those problems and the global questions that made him reimagine what the solutions might be. That's more, but I'm all about that global stuff. I want y'all to respond to that, and that who has questions. So while y'all respond, I just want to see where the hands are. Of course, we'll start with our dear brother. And Dr. Muhammad, he's here in the back, a contemporary of Malcolm X, and really a legend in Philadelphia and in our movement. We're going to have, we definitely want to hear from Dr. Ahmed as well, of course. And what's the other hand right here? So we're going to go here. But first, feel free to answer that question if y'all were about to, sort of in terms of Malcolm's direction.
I think in the end of the autobiography, there's a chapter where Malcolm says that if he had time left, he would like to study Chinese and Arabic. He said because he believes that Chinese would be the political language of the future, and that Arabic would be the religious language of the future. And if you think about every place except for the Nation of Islam in the 30s and the 40s, there was a real question in the Muslim world, the Middle East, and other places in the Muslim world about whether Islam was even viable anymore. They don't talk about that a lot. A lot of Arab states have turned to secularism. They turned to Arab nationalism. And Islam was becoming revitalized globally right here among the African-American Muslim community. And so in some ways, the nation, and by extension, Malcolm, were almost prophetic. And I don't think he would have been surprised to see the rise of Islamic militancy and the return to militant Islam as a global phenomenon. He predicted it, basically. So do I think that he would have left Islam? No. And if you think about it, where is the Communist Party's strength today? Where is the Soviet Union? Where are some of the revolutionary formations that people were looking to for vehicles of liberation? But Islam is still continuing to grow in its vitality. In all the things I said that Malcolm looked to Islam for: militancy, morality, unity. It's still a growing global and powerful force, and you can tell, you can measure it by how free the open entity is of it and its rise.
Yeah. We got a question right here. Yes, sir.
I was misquoted by Manning in Manning Marvel's book. Abdul Razak, James Shabazz was
You told me before, I know I did, but just give people a little context, because I think it's important, you know, that we have a revered elder in the room who's not just somebody who's there, but who's central to what's happening. So, Brad, everything is please.
I'm Dr. Muhammad Ahmed. I was one of the founders of the Revolutionary Action Movement. Have had my action before I was, incarcerated. Malcolm joined our organization. So Manning Marvel interviewed me for his book. I'm misquoting. Abdul Razak, James Shabazz, who was in the nation, left with me. It was the same. Was also misquoted. I talked to Manning one day before his death. He called. The book was coming out. I said, Manning, half of Malcolm's history is here in Philadelphia. There are Muslims who are still alive who worked with him since 1952, for my knowledge. He said it's too late. We all knew that Charles Kenyatta was a little shaky, but we did not have proof. Manning said that he saw his COINTELPRO documents and that Charles Kenyatta was the one who was in Malcolm's ear to come out against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and was an agent for the Bureau of Secret Service in New York. All right. I guess you can find that now. I haven't seen it. I heard that from Manning. When Razak came to Philly and we were sitting putting things together, he told me that they had put Charles out of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. There is a right, middle, and left in everything. And it was in the Nation of Islam as well. All right. So Akbar and Wallace influenced Malcolm. All right. Even while he was still in the nation. When Malcolm left, the man that influenced him the most was Abdul Rahim Razak in Zanzibar. And, I mean, he passed now. He was a revolutionary. All right. And so I'm saying that as you know, we're all dealing with that element, you know, and that there's much more
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And for those of you who are scholars and historians, particularly oral historians, we have to make sure that we hear those voices and that we get those stories. That's right. He only got about 100 years left with us. So all of our elders, we must get these stories. We must learn and hear from them right there. That's Max Stanford. Yes, sir. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Dr. Muhammad Ahmed is also Max Stanford. Same person. Yes. Legend. Founder of Revolutionary Action Movement. Yes. Yes. I wasn't just picking random people in the crowd. There was another hand. Oh, yes, sir. Smoothest brother in the room.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Raza Khan, and I'm Sunni. Now, let me correct that. I call myself, if somebody asks me, Sunni for a while. I might be the only one in that particular religion, but that's what I feel. You know what I'm saying? And I would like to ask this question, maybe y'all can clarify, because reading the Hadith, it says, if you see a wrong, straighten it with your hands. If you can't straighten it with your hands, straighten it with your tongue. If you can't do that, hate it in your heart. But that's the weakest of faith. Saudi Arabia, somebody please show me anywhere in the Quran where there's a thing called a royal family.
That's a great question. Let me put a little piece on top of that brilliant question, which is, to what extent is part of what Malcolm, my experience when I travel in the Middle East, especially now, is that when they talk about black Muslims, the poster child for it is either Malcolm or Muhammad Ali, right? And the narrative is that they got it right because they do what the Saudi family wants. They do Islam correct. They do what the Muslim Brotherhood wants, etc., etc., etc. To what extent are black Muslims even legible within the global Muslim community? And what I mean by that is, to be specific, to what extent are we still beholden to Arab-centered understandings of Islam, and how does that undermine our ability to practice Islam in a way that is responsive to our needs, our demands? On the other hand, let me say one more piece about this, one more piece of this question. Is it possible to have a theological commitment and fidelity to the Quran and to Hadith, but still do Islam in a different way? I hear Brother Wesley sometimes talk about my Islam, this Islam, and it's one of the things I take very seriously, how you think about those things. So if you all could sort of talk about what it means to be a black Muslim and how you navigate that thing of being Muslim, having theology, being true to it, but also not want to be an Arab.
Right, and understand that the foundation of the superstructure known as the Muslim world is the revelation of the Holy Quran. The Holy Quran, Minister Farrakhan teaches us, it comes with its own culture, the culture of the righteous. It should not be superimposed by anyone's culture, least of all the Arab culture. And I think too often people can get the two confused depending on who's teaching you at the earlier stages of your learning about Islam. But keep in mind that, you know, when it comes to family and that, even Jesus said, who is my mother and who is my brother? And Prophet Muhammad even said the same. Those that do the will of the Father, if it's going to be anything royal, you're going to have to be royal in that culture of righteousness, of being careful of your duty to your God.
I think in answer to your question, and I'm thinking about the time it takes us, it took me 10 years to get a PhD in Islamic studies, with time spent overseas doing Arabic and some other things. I think one of the things that happens is you have to come back to the United States and unlearn and then relearn. And that takes a little bit of time. Because this, I think, is one of the rare times where I, as an Islamic studies person, is asked to talk about Malcolm also. We lecture all over the world about African American Muslims and try to convince them that the picture they have of Malcolm X is not the picture. But African Americans do not study under us. I mean, I've taught for 30 years, and I can count the African American students in Islamic studies. It's not African American studies, it's not some other study, but even Muslims don't take Islamic studies. And even when we've taught online, the number of African Americans is very small. Then on the other side, as an African American Muslim woman, I rail at the treatment of Muslim women in the Muslim world. I rail at the fact that many have tried to bring that here. You know, I don't get in the back of anything, as many in the Masajid will tell you in Chicago, and I'm not about to. But I think that people outside of Islam, what they see is all the Muslims are men, and the women are there to serve them. And if this wasn't a church, I'd say some other things, but I'll leave that to your imagination. But I think that that is what is seen. You know, I hang out, and at my tender age, I still periodically go to MGT classes, just so I can make sure what I don't know, I learn again. The outreach to the general black community is still enormous. And the problems being faced are still there. Our women have, it's like we're doing a yo-yo back from on the precipice of self-respect back to something else. And I do spend a lot of time telling the young men, put your pants up and trying to figure out what do you have in your hair, you know, and why is this your body presentation, you know? And it's not just in the black community, it's everywhere, you know? But what does that say about us as a society? And I think that the thing that he was talking about Sunni Islam, I personally, I listen to Hadith. For me, Hadith is a primary example of text written by the other white man.
Yes.
That's just me. There's no centerpiece for women, except to call them black dogs and some other things. So I leave them alone, you know, even in the courses, I sat there and I tried, as the only woman in class, I think all of those, mostly Arab men, were real tired of me because I was stomping my foot and doing some other things. But I think that it is important for women to claim Islam. On the other side, it is important for them to claim them with righteous men, if that makes sense. So, you know, at another level, we're dealing with the claims of feminisms. And I like to say I'm a lover of women. I'm not too sure about feminism because it's too deep for me, probably. But
it's a whole other panel.
No, but I think that it's important. You know, when you look at Malcolm, you see two things. You see the nation, and then you see something else, and you're not sure what that is. But I think in terms of shifts in theology, for me, there is no shift. There is a maturation, and with maturation always comes reflection. You know, because you don't get to see where you are, really, until you look at what nurtured you. You know, and you have to, it's a reflection kind of thing.
I'm gonna give Dr. Wesley the last one. I know you have a question, brother, but I promise you we stay on time and focus.
Why? All of a sudden you want to be on time?
No, y'all can't. You know what? Your question, you got your question. So you can do that, Dr. Wesley, then you can ask your question, my brother.
Thank you, Dr. Mark. The question of being black Muslim and fidelity to the Quran, the discourse around it, as you know, is dear to me. It's in fact central to my body of work. I too took nearly 10 years to get a PhD in Islamic studies. Yeah. What has to be understood, and this is critical, in evaluating Malcolm X and his Islam, evaluating Malcolm X and his transition and what that means, what language are we to use? Did he transition to correct Islam? Was important to understand as we seek to disengage Arab cultural imperialism. So I guess that means we don't want to, we're cool with not wearing a kufi. Yet, most of what is Sunni and Shiite Islam is Arab, but mainly Iranian theological imperialism. And so even when we throw the kufi off, culturally, we approach the Quran with an interpretation that was crafted by mainly Persian medieval scholars. And so when the Nation of Islam, when the Sunni and Shiite world, when Sunni or Shiite Muslims or Salafi Muslims here in America say the Nation of Islam teaches shirk, the Nation of Islam does not teach true Islam, the criterion by which they judge the Nation of Islam is not an authentic, unprejudiced reading of the Quran as if the Quran itself condemns the theology of the Nation of Islam. No, it's a particular theological paradigm that originated over there over centuries that is imposed on the Quran, but people decouple the cultural imperialism from the theological imperialism. What my engagement, being an Islamic studies scholar, spent the time to get the doctorate in Islamic studies, wrote my dissertation by engaging the classical Islamic text. The sum total of my body of work is that the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is Ahlal Sunnah. The theology of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad.
So we got, and Dr. Wesley's book, Dr. Wesley's dissertation it's a little different, but it's a book. It's also a book that's back there, right? What's the name of that book?
Well, what we have back there is understanding the assault on the black man, black manhood, and black masculinity, but also the Book of God, an encyclopedia of proof that the black man is God. And let me say something real quick.
Use the mic though, my brother.
What'd you say?
With the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the two books, understanding the assault on the black man, black manhood, and black masculinity, and the second book, the Book of God, an encyclopedia of proof that the black man is God. And the point I want to make with that, it was said, I believe it was Brother Dr. Mark Anthony Neal, who said that Malcolm X's masculinity reflected 20th century American ideals of masculinity. I have to respectfully disagree. Malcolm Little's and Detroit Red's ideals of masculinity reflected 20th century Western ideals of masculinity. But Malcolm X's masculinity that he learned in a training class with hundreds and thousands of other black men, that masculinity was based on a particular principle. The black masculinity that I.C. Davis memorialized as our black signing prince, that was based on a principle that he learned in his manhood training class. Like all of us, the black man is God. That's why his masculinity was what it was, and that's why the Honorable Mr. Louis Farrakhan's masculinity is what it is. That's why how Cassius Clay's masculinity became what it was. These were not individual articulations. These were born in a context, in a training class, the central pillar of which is the black man is God. That's the difference between Malcolm Little's masculinity and Malcolm X's masculinity.
I feel like I've been irresponsible if I didn't let somebody push back if they wanted to. Oh, did somebody want to respond? Because I saw heads moving. So I don't want to. Did anybody want to respond to that particular comment? Yes, okay. We're going to go here because I want you to respond because that's part of what it is to have community dialogue. And I saw the heads moving. And I don't want y'all to come at me afterward. And a lot of times speakers come, and when they leave, y'all be like, why? You should. No, you should. So we're going to do that right now. And then this brother right here is going to give his last word, and this brother right here is going to ask his question. 2 questions. You're going to ask them at the same time, then y'all can answer it. No, we're going to hear first. Absolutely. And then after that, with you given the opportunity to briefly rejoin, we're going to do these. Then we got to go because I'm tired, actually. But I could make up a real good reason, but I'm just tired. But no, but seriously, because people have time commitments, and I want to make sure we honor the time commitments of people who came a very long way, and we're 15 minutes behind right now, and I figured we'd be about 15 minutes behind. I don't want to be 30 minutes behind. So if we could, I want to give you a chance to respond, engage. Then I'm going to have you to ask your questions, and then we're going to move to the final panel. But thank you all for this. This is great, man. I'm so excited at the fact that the room is getting bigger as the night gets longer. So this is beautiful. Thank you so much.
So as an Arab woman, I'd like to say, or just take a note, complexity and new. Yeah. Like this? Yeah. All right. To show the nuance of one group, you do not need.
What I ask you, will work for me. That might be an issue. Stand up. Yeah. Try standing up, and let me see. If you put it, if you hold the microphone right here, you should be good about it.
Thank you. So what I'm saying is, as an Arab woman, and it's just a note, to show the complexity and nuance of one group, which I appreciate and respect, you do not need to centralize or be reductionist about another group. And the conflation of Saudi Arabia and Arab and a hegemonic, Saudi presence as the leaders or exemplifiers of Arabs and Muslims is highly problematic. And I've listened all day, and I love the nuance, and I love how you say, don't talk about us, but please don't talk about Arab women that way either. Thank you.
I think that was a very, very important point to make, and I hope I didn't do that. But let me say this in all truth and honesty. The Saudi hegemony is real. To act as though it is not, and I've been all over the North African world. I can't say I've been a little west too. But having lived there, I think that there are, and I know that there are cultural differences, but I also know about that Arab hegemony. And I know that the Rabata sent imams and brought them in for training so that they would proliferate certain kinds of understandings of Islam. I also know that many in the Arab world have not studied the Quran at all. And so that the women who, whether I'm there in my other hat to work on clitorectomies, or I'm there to talk about the issues with women, as we have done recently in getting the court system up in Morocco so that there were women judges, that women do have some problems. What happens here is that generally, because then you have a conflation of the Arab woman with the South Asian woman, and you're absolutely right, we should not conflate to talk about the position we have here. But that position so impacts who we are here. It makes being an African-American Muslim woman somehow a third or fourth class Muslim person. Whether the actual individual wants to do that or not, probably I know for a fact it's far from the truth. But that is the standard. It is the standard of beauty. It is the standard of etiquette. It is the standard of knowledge or not of Arabic. You know, if you don't know Arabic, you can't be a Muslim. When many of the cultural Muslims living there can't read as much Arabic as me. So, that's why there is a railing, because its presence here in the United States has so belittled us that it becomes a railing. But I think your point is an excellent point that makes all of us mindful. Thank you for that.
I'm going to
question. But it touches on what you just said. I think my question is around the feature of the Nation of Islam. I think Islam teaches unity, as you all mentioned, and I think currently there's a disconnect between Nation of Islam and maybe other Islamic communities. So my question is, how do we, as a group, whether Nation of Islam or just a Sunni or Shiite, how do we go away from having Muhammad Ali or Malcolm X as the face of the Nation of Islam and having Muhammad as the example that we all follow?
Unity. Brother here had one question. They're going to conjoin because I just believe in the spirit of black people.
Yes, assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Mubarak. My question is, Malcolm X stated in his famous speech, The Ballad of the Bullet, that we must not just fight on one front, but we must fight on all fronts. And today, with everything that's going on with the assault on the black man, black masculinity, and black manhood, how important is it for us to just fight on all four fronts and not focus on one particular front?
Okay, I'm going to ask any or each of you to answer that. We have literally about 1 minute per person. If one of you wants to be in the spirit of Ramadan, significantly, Kareem, and yield that time, we can. One person can answer, but we got to wrap. Go ahead. Those questions.
Real quickly, of course, Brother Lamont, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said the mistake that Hitler made, which cost him the war, was he tried to fight a war on two fronts, and he was unsuccessful. Black people in America, of course, don't have the luxury that Hitler had of not fighting a war on two fronts, or three or four. We have to fight because of how the attack comes at us at so many levels and so many guises. So we don't have the luxury of being selective with the front that we fight on. The great thing is black people are multifaceted enough. There's a place for every black organization in the effort. We can deploy the NAACP where the NAACP should be deployed. We can deploy the black Greeks where the black Greeks should be deployed. Every single black effort at helping black people has its place because of all of those fronts. Now, to your point, dear brother, said Islam is about unity. I don't know if by that you meant unity in the sense of Tawheed, theological, or theosophical unity, or human unity, whatever the case may be. Islam is about unity, but Islam is about fighting against oppression. Islam inherently is about, coming from the Quran, fighting oppression. And so, in most cases, in the fight against oppression, there will not be unity between the oppressor and the oppressed until after that fight is won.
Thank you for that too. And as far as the face of Muhammad, I don't know that there is any face to put up. When they had a movie about the early years of Islam there on the Arabian Peninsula, the people there didn't want any character playing Prophet Muhammad. So there was never anything there. I don't know of any picture or anything that can be put up. I know at the Irvine Auditorium, sitting there with Imam Warfdeen Muhammad from the East, they were talking about us having pictures of Malcolm, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Muhammad Ali, Minister Farrakhan, and Imam Warfdeen Muhammad reminded them they carry big posters around of Ayatollah Khomeini and other Islamic leaders in their country. Where do they get the right to do that? And somehow we don't have the right to do that. We have to assert ourselves, and as Brother Lamont said, on every front. And I wanted to say for my sister about women being minimized, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan's national spokesperson is a woman. Student Minister Ava Muhammad
And she'll be in Philadelphia next month. We're having a whole symposium on separation, because the worst thing can happen to us now that reparations has become mainstream in the conversation. The worst thing that happened to us after slavery and Jim Crow and every kind of oppression you can name is that we get reparations and we're still hardwired to our oppressors. In a decade here, I have all that money and wealth right back in his hand. We need to be separated when we get reparations. That's the way it was in the book of Exodus.
All right, family, this has been another wonderful, provocative, stirring, edifying panel. I'm so grateful to everybody that's been up here. Please give a round of applause to Mr. Rodney Muhammad, Dr. Wesley Muhammad. Yes. Dr. Malik Ambassador. Oh, man. Sister Abner has been keeping me in check with time and everything else. And I want to thank you again for coming and being so generous. Again, coming from Chicago. Actually, you and Dr. Wesley came from Chicago. So I came all the way from Chicago for this event. Man, that means a great deal as well. All right. We are going to set up for our final panel. It is 7:10, and we will be starting the next panel at 7:15. So I asked the panelists to begin to make their way. We're going to do a photo up front with the panelists here, and then we're going to bring the new panelists up. Take a stretch. Again, all the books we mentioned are available at Uncle Bobby's, t-shirts, all that stuff. I'm not here to sell you stuff, but do know this is how we stay open. So feel free to, buy stuff.
Great.